Hello guys and welcome to my new video. So today I decided to do a video about RESTO DRUID gameplay. I don't actually think I had a video about something like this in particular, and I get a lot of questions from new players, especially questions about healing touch and regrowth and things like, should I be using spells like that? And it really prompted me to make a video about what is one of the best ways to play a Restoration Druid. When should I be using specific spells? What spells do I use and things like that. So it's really important to know that if you do choose to play a Restoration Druid, you most of the time, especially in raid scenario, will not touch your regrowth or your healing. You can actually delete healing touch from your click A, your key bindings, whatever, because in raid you will never touch healing touch. I'm actually surprised it's actually still in the game for Restoration Druid. It's probably the least used spell in the game. And if you actually do use Healing Touch, there are niche scenarios where you can use Healing Touch in 5-mans. But most likely you will never touch it in raid scenario. You should never use Regrowth outside of a clear casting proc. So clear casting is going to proc when you use Light Bloom. It's going to show like these green arrows on your screen. That's what Blizzard actually, there you go, that's the way it's prompted. And then you can go regrowth. That's it. It's the only time that you want to be using regrowth. Unless someone is about to absolutely die, is going to die, and your regrowth and your rejuvenation is not going to save them, you will not be using regrowth. So these two spells, you should get them. You should really not use them unless the two scenarios that I mentioned, clear casting or someone is about to die, and rejuvenations are not going to save them. So let's see just the basic rotation for Restoration Druid. There are a couple of things that you should be using, or there's a spell uptime. It's part of a rotation. It's basically meaning there's a couple of spells that you should maintain to as close to 100% uptime as possible. It's almost like a rotation for a DPS. It's almost like that. So you need to make sure that your Light Bloom stays on target at all times, mainly on the tank. You got to realize the Light Bloom has an expiry effect, a bloom effect that's going to heal when it expires. This expiry effect can happen anytime between the last 4 seconds. So you can actually press Light Bloom again and it's going to use that, it's going to bloom even though it didn't expire fully. So technically you can maintain 100% uptime without ever dropping Light Bloom. It's going to be hard to do that, but it's possible. So try and maintain Light Bloom to 100% as possible. Fluorescence is one of those things that you should also try. It's actually quite efficient. It's actually quite mana efficient. It's one of the really good mana efficient spells in the game. It might seem like there's a lot of mana usage from the start, but you gotta remember it's 30 seconds. It heals 3 people at a time. It actually is a really good usage. It actually is a really good spell, especially with tier 20. But we're not gonna go into tier 20 yet. So try and maintain this to 100% uptime as possible. Of course, try and get at least, if you can, try get 3 players inside it. If you can't, try and get the whole raid inside it, because it's going to heal 3 players, then it might swap to another player who is taking damage. So it swaps around all the time, but it only heals 3 people at the same time. So a Fluorescence, Light Bloom. Now, if you are using tier 19 tier set, which I am using, your talent tree might look similar, well, not this, but you most likely will have Scenario Ward. And Scenario Ward is just another, let me just equip it. And Scenario Ward is going to be another spell that you need to maintain 100% uptime. It's basically a hot, let's say it's a hot, so you should most likely use it on a tank. So you have Light Bloom and Scenario Ward placed on a tank 100% of the time if possible. It's going to add 2 additional hots to the tank player. By having 2 additional hots and then having rejuvenations on the tank, you're gonna benefit a lot from your mastery. So your tank is going to be healed. Like, you probably won't even have to worry about the tank at all. You just put the hots on them and that's it. So this is it. This is the basic Resto Druid gameplay for the main couple of spells that you need to maintain. Fluorescence, Light Bloom, Scenario Ward, if you're spec'd into it. Now you have your healing arsenal that you have to use based on the situation, based on how many people are taking damage, based on incoming damage and things like that. Restoration Druid healing is all about allowing the players to dip low, not bringing them up to 100 HP straight away. It's allowing for your HOTS to do their work. If you're playing something like a Holy Paladin, whose main idea is to get someone from 10% to 100% in like a couple of seconds, then you won't like Restoration Druid game style, because the whole game style revolves around letting your HOTS slowly tick and get them to full HP. And that's why it's really annoying when some other healers will top them up and your HOTS will be ticking on a person who's at 100% HP. So that's what the element of difficulty that comes into playing Restoration Druid. How do you battle that? How do you avoid that? And things like that. As a Restoration Druid, your overhealing will always be very, very high, and you can't really change that. So besides your Fluorescence, besides your Life Bloom, besides your Scenario Word, you have your Rejuvenation. This is your #1 single best spell for Restoration Druid. Is the spell. You could almost say that Rejuvenation is what makes a Restoration Druid a Restoration Druid. Rejuvenation is your bread and butter, especially if you spec into things like Germination, which gives you 2 rejuvenations. So you have 2 HOTS to put on targets. And this spell, every time a person takes damage or is lowish enough, you should use Rejuvenation. Not your Regrowth, not your Healing Touch, your Rejuvenation. Your Rejuvenation has a crazy amount of synergy with your talents, with your stats, with like so many different things. Especially with tier 19, Rejuvenation's synergy with items and things like that is just insane. It's probably one of the most synergized spells in the game, and that's one of the reasons why Restoration Druids were nerfed. It's one of the reasons why Restoration Druid Legendary Showless was nerfed, or were nerfed, purely because of the fact how they were behaving with Rejuvenation. Now, Rejuvenation is your key spell. How do you actually use it? Obviously, one of the best ways is when a person takes damage, you can press Rejuvenation on them, and Rejuvenation will heal them up. It doesn't always work. The best way to actually do it is to predict damage, or to actually know when the damage is incoming. So if for fights, let's say, let me think of an example. Let's say Sisters. Let's say Sisters of the Moon. You know that the group is split into 4 or whatever, how you do Sisters of the Moon. And you know that the group is going to be, I'm talking Mythic for example, and you know the group is going to be crossing over to the next side. You're ready to rejuvenate. Go and rejuvenate people. You need to know your mana limitations on this, but pre-hot. Before the damage comes in, person is at 100% HP. Just place rejuvenations on them. Place on rejuvenations as many people as possible. And when damage comes in, your rejuvenation will be ready, ticking and healing the person. It works especially well if you have the Legendary Showless in tier 19, because once the person is full HP, Legendary Showless are going to extend the rejuvenation because that person is 100% HP. So pre-hotting works really, really well. Now, you can't go crazy and pre-hot the whole raid all the time, because your mana won't allow this unless you have external mana tools, things like Blessing of Wisdoms or external innovates. You will not be able to do this at all the times, unless the fight is like maybe 2 minutes long, which is not yet possible in Tumusagera. It's probably soon though. But you cannot really pre-hot everyone. So you pre-hot a couple of people, you pre-hot the people who are in the group who are going to be swapping over. It's really good to know what players are going to be taking damage. Like I said, Sister of the Moon. Maybe it's the melee who are going to be crossing over, so you just pre-hot the melee. So like I said, you have the Fluorescence down on them, you have the Life Bloom, you have the Scenario Ward on the tank, Life Bloom on the tank as well most of the time, and then you have your Rejuvenations, and you're pre-hotting those Rejuvenations before the damage comes in. Hydrosanin is also a good example. You know when Hydrosanin is about to do that smash in front of everyone? If you have a weak core, it tells you the energy goes up from 50, 60, 70, 80, and 90, and at 100 it does a big AoE damage. Make sure your Rejuvenations are rolling before 90%, because you know when that damage comes in, your Rejuvenation is going to be taking damage, and if you have your Efflorescence, it's going to be healing as well. It works especially well if you have tier 20, because right before the damage comes in, you can Swift Mend, and you can your Efflorescence will be doing a lot of healing at that time. So now, this is Rejuvenation. Also, another thing that I should be covering before this guide gets actually way too long, dot fights. So a fight on where players get dots on them, and they're going to be ticking for like, you know, 15, 20 seconds. They're going to take away that, take people's HP away, take damage or whatever. Fights like Goroth. In Goroth, you have a couple of people having a dot. Fights like Kill Jaden, where there are a lot of people with a dot that lasts over 20 seconds. This is what Resto Druids are best at. Have your grid, have your raid frame set up in a way that you can see those dots clearly. And make sure if you're using rejuvenation or if you're using germination as well, make sure you always have HOTS ticking on them. That's almost a guaranteed healing. That's almost guaranteed healing that you get. First of all, no other healer really have that ability to really provide a crazy amount of healing for people who are taking continuous damage. So Restoration Druid perfect fight are fights to which there is a lot of dots on players. They have to be like 10 or 15 seconds or whatever throughout the fight. Fights where there's continuous damage like Maidens. If there's continuous damage and movement, Resto Druids do really well. So, like I said, you have your Efflorescence, you have your Light Bloom, you have your Scenario Word, you're pre-hotting people with your rejuvenations, you're pre-hotting people who have dots. It doesn't really count pre-hotting, but you're hotting up people who have dots on them, so 2 rejuvenations if you can. If you don't, it depends. And besides that, Wild Growth. That's your #1 AoE heal ability. Wild Growth is just really good. It's your, again, your signature spell. It does have a 10-second cooldown, so you kinda really can't waste it. So the thing about Wild Growth is that once you cast it, it has an initial heal. It has a little initial heal that's going to heal people straight away. It's not a complete hot. So it has a initial heal, and after that it places a hot on people that slowly and gradually becomes worse over time. So the first couple of seconds is going to heal a lot, and then after that it's going to drop down. So you can see here, I have an initial heal of 153,000 and I have a hot that initially and gradually becomes worse. So you can see it became at, you can't really see the screen, but it became at 41,000 and then it slowly dropped down to 14,000 over healing. So because of this, first of all, Wild Growth affects around 6 people. It affects more people if you're in 3. But the point is, you should most likely be using it when there's like, it really depends, but I mean, if there's 6 people taking damage, then that's perfect. You can Wild Growth, and Wild Growth is a smart heal, so it's actually going to pick up the people who are taking damage. It's super easy. If there are 3 people taking damage, you can still use Wild Growth. You know why? Because if you have tier 19 2-piece, which is insane right now, Wild Growth grants you 4,000 mastery for 7 seconds. So by just using Wild Growth inefficiently, you'll be using it purely to get the 4,000 mastery buff. So for example, on Garoth, you have those 3 or 4 people with a dot. You have those double rejuvenations ticking on them. You can see only 3 people are taking hot, but you can just cast Wild Growth to get that 4,000 mastery and increase the healing on those people with the dot. So you're using Wild Growth as a pure mechanic to get 4,000 mastery. It is viable and you can do this. Keep in mind that what if damage is going to be incoming in the next 5 seconds and your Wild Growth is on cooldown and you can't use it. You have to know the fight to actually pull this off, and you have to have the mana to actually do it as well. Like, I mean, I look at the tier 19 2-piece uptime. So like I said, every time you do Wild Growth, you get 4,000 mastery for 7 seconds. So technically, if you cast Wild Growth the second it comes off cooldown, you can get a 70% uptime on that buff. The average that I've seen, or a good thing to aim for, is 40% plus of uptime on that on tier 19 2-piece buff. But like I said, it doesn't have to be 6 players. It can be 4, 3, or whatever. Especially if you're using with tier 19 2-piece, it's going to buff. It's going to give you master, and master is one of the best stats, depending on the thing. If we look at tier 20 gameplay, the gameplay actually changes a lot. So, for example, I have my tier 20 set here, and you most likely will be running with Prosperity, probably with Solo the Archdruid Ring, and build something similar to this depending on what content you're doing. Doesn't really matter about the 45. But like I said, your game style is going to change. The basic game style won't. Life Bloom and Efflorescence still have to have 100% uptime. You won't have Scenario Word because most likely you'll be playing Prosperity. So a lot of your healing right now will be depending on Efflorescence. Efflorescence most likely will be your top heal. Now, by playing tier 19, your Rejuvenation was probably your top heal. Now, with swapping over to tier 20, your Fluorescence is going to be your top heal, and if you're actually running with Solo the Archdruid Ring, your Wild Growth is going to be a lot higher than he usually is with tier 19. So, the big deal about it is placing your Fluorescence in a good spot. That is your number one worry with tier 20. After you know your Fluorescence is in a good spot, Swiftment will activate. Swiftment will activate your efflorescence increased healing. You can see here my efflorescence is ticking for a lot more than it should be, and making sure that people are staying in efflorescence is your number one key, is your number one priority. There's also specific mechanics with making sure to refresh your efflorescence right after it expires in order to make sure that your not deep-rooted Joy of Springs tier trait works fully. So like I said, the most important thing is making sure that people stay in it. You gotta keep in mind that with tier 20 you can place efflorescences all over the place. With the tier 20 buff, any efflorescence will still have that buff and maintain that buff all the time. So it does give you a choice of movement, but the choice of efflorescence movement also increases your mana usage by way more. There's a special ways of actually dealing it, like let's say for example, if you do end up using Innervate, or you might even consider using Innervate during a phase where people are moving out of your efflorescence and you already have the efflorescence buff, you can use Innervate and just keep efflorescence or move efflorescence during that time. Because during the Innervate, it's also very mana efficient to actually, during the whole Innervate duration, to replace or renew your efflorescence duration. So the main idea beside Swiftmend and Prosperity is to make sure that every time you use Swiftmend, to not actually use it the minute it comes off cooldown, to actually use your Swiftmend, and if you don't use it the minute it comes back off cooldown, which you can see here in 17 seconds, you can kind of save these Swiftmend charges that you can use during heavy AoE damage, and that's when Prosperity actually works quite well. So by having two Swiftmend charges, I'm going to say two Swiftmend charges, but it doesn't really exactly work like that. It allows you to account for damage that's going to be incoming, and only using Swiftmend when there's a lot of damage. And by using Soul of the Archdruid Ring, you will get Soul of the Forest buff that will buff your next Wild Growth, Rejuvenation, or Regrowth. But you most likely in raid scenario will want to use that for Wild Growth. So make sure every time you Swiftmend, your efflorescence is down in a group of players and you are ready to use a Wild Growth in the next 15 seconds to activate the Soul of the Forest buff. By doing this, you will maximize your HPS in the best possible way with tier 20 and Soul of the Archdruid Ring. Now this is how the gameplay changes from tier 19 to tier 20. A lot more emphasis into efflorescence, a lot more emphasis into Swiftmend usage. But the big deal is the efflorescence. If the fight does not allow people to be stacked for periods of time, if there's only two people standing in it, if you're not maximizing it, tier 20 will lose its value. And if you have to move your efflorescence too much in order to utilize your tier 20 buff, your mana is going to suffer. So there's a lot of different consequences that you need to play around. Now, if there are fights like Desolate Host inside Spirit Realm where people don't move at all for about 90% of the fight, your efflorescence is going to be really powerful. So I'm hoping that this was a helpful enough guide for the beginners, for the beginner Resto Druids, just getting a better idea of what Resto Druid healing is like. Maybe if you're swapping over from like another healer or from a DPS and you're looking into playing Resto Druids, Resto Druid is definitely a really nice class to start playing. I feel that it has a very high potential for a lot of nice progression fights. Like I said, it's all about letting your HOTS do the work. If you want people to be healed up straight away, then you probably should not be playing Resto Druid. If you enjoy having hundreds of HOTS on people, if you enjoy seeing the HOTS running slowly and healing them up all the time, and if the bosses do constant damage, you see the healing meters going up like crazy, and there's a lot of movement in a fight, Resto Druid is a perfect healer to play. Thank you for watching this little guide, and I'll see you next time.